We're going to talk today a little bit about what hacking was like and phreaking was like, and what the whole scene was kind of like back in the 80s and 90s. You know, how did this start? What was it like back then? And how does that lead us to where we're at today? And what does that mean for us kind of going forward? All of these views and opinions are obviously my own. You know, everybody's experience might be a little bit different. So if anybody during the talk wants to, bring something up or interject something, by all means. This is a very social talk, right? So feel free to interject things and to jump in if you like. So the talk is Hack in the Day, play on words for back in the day, right? So who am I? My name is Brad Swanson. You can find me on Twitter as Digital Templar, or you can just shoot me an email at Gmail. I am the incident response lead currently for a SaaS provider based out in California. Formerly, I've been with Amazon, with Thermo Fisher Scientific, in a variety of security or audit-related roles. A lot of PCI, a lot of SOX, all that goodness. I've been doing security stuff for about 25 years now. Most of it as a good guy. The early years were a little sketchy, obviously, as many of us had. I got started in the 80s. My folks bought me an Osborne back in the day, and I got the Osborne in January. Had Colossal Caves adventure. Was sick of the pirate killing me in the twisty passages, so by February I was learning how to take it apart and fix the software so the pirate wouldn't kill me all the time. Couriered back in the day for Frozen Crew at a really slow baud rate, which led to a recreational interest in how phone systems worked to help cut down on my electric or my phone bill. Some of the things I like, social engineering. I love social engineering stuff. I just find it fascinating how you can hack people's brains. Red teaming. I want to be a red teamer when I grow up, and I also like romantic walks on the beach while sniffing Wi-Fi. So the standard disclaimer, these are my experiences, these are my views, my opinions. They do not reflect any stance of my employer, any stance of the team that I work with, et cetera, my views only. My employer wouldn't even know that I'm here, except my boss is in the audience right now. So everybody clap when we're done here. Make it look, oh, not now, just when we're done, yeah. Also some other just extra information. If anybody has peanut allergies, look out for me. I'm like peanut dust. It's not good. So we're going to cover basically three different kind of areas at a very high level here. We're going to look at the social aspects. What was it like back then, and how is it now? Obviously, hacking has become a very social thing. We're all here. We're all at CypherCon. We're all interacting with each other. It's not just I'm in my own little area with my head down, hacking away on a keyboard. We're talking with each other. We're learning from each other. We are, interacting and interfacing as humans rather than just a name on a screen in green font. We're also going to look at hacking. What are some differences between hacking back then and hacking now? And we'll touch a little bit on phreaking as well, and what the good old days were like versus what it's like today. So the social aspect. Back in the day, hacking was not as I guess anonymous, if you will, as it is now. It was started by friends. It was groups of friends that had something that brought them together other than hacking. So we have like the 414s, for example, right here in Milwaukee. The 414s were actually a group of friends. They were Explorer Scouts. They knew each other. And they had an interest in computers, sure. So they would kind of go with the, go out and explore things, and then they found out that they could explore with their computers. And so that led to a little bit of trouble. They hacked a bunch of systems. They got into Sloan Kettering, went to touch the log files to make sure that they didn't get caught, and did a little bit of damage financially, about $1,500, I believe. And that's what got them popped. They ended up on the cover of Newsweek. People had not really been exposed mainstream to hackers before, right? So it was a big deal. People didn't know how to deal with them. A couple of them were charged with like a toll fraud type of charge, but there were no computer crime laws really back then. So yeah, so and then again though, a group of friends that started out. There was the firm, they were initially called Kilobaud. They did a lot of sysopping of bulletin board systems. If it was a hacker board, a lot of times it would be somebody from the firm that would help out with the sysopping of that. There was the Loft, Loft Heavy Industries out in Boston. That started as roommates. It was a couple of guys that were roommates. Their girlfriends, they had a loft area in Boston, and their girlfriends had a hat company. They sold hats out of this loft. They made hats and sold them. They used the other half of the loft to store equipment that they got from the flea market at MIT. So they would get all this equipment, they'd bring it in, they'd hack around on it, they'd fix stuff up, they'd do cool things, and then they'd flip it. And it turned into basically what was the equivalent of the first hacker space. Where their friends would come over and hack around on hardware. We had Cult of the Dead Cow down in Lubbock, Texas. There were a bunch of friends that worked together at a meatpacking plant. Hence the name Cult of the Dead Cow. They dealt with dead cows all day. And so again, groups of friends that were friends before they were a hacking group, right? Then it expanded a little bit, right? So you've got these friends that you're hanging out with and doing computer coolness with. What if we could meet more people? Well, how do we do that? How do we spread the word? How do we get the word out there? BBSs. Let's advertise on BBSs. Let's spin up a hacker BBS. Let's have some text files that we can, have people come and read and learn a little bit. We had things like the Legion of Doom, which was run by Fiber Optic. There was Masters of Deception with Eric Bloodaxe, who used to be part of Legion of Doom, that are falling out and they split off. There are courier groups like Fairlight, Frozen Crew, and they were, they started as friends and then they expanded out. They brought in people that they didn't know that weren't part of that core group of friends. Now it's a hacker friend. It's my online friend. It's my BBS friend. And then, so how do we advance that? How do we grow that? How do we take that another step further? Let's meet people face to face. Kind of scary, but let's give it a shot and see what happens. So there were things like the Chaos Communications Congress. This took place in Germany. It was run by the CCC, the Chaos Computer Club, and it basically brought European hackers together to kind of learn from each other and share things. We had the Hackers Conference. There was a book that was written. I don't recall the name of the book specifically right now, my apologies, but there was a book that was written that talked about a bunch of hackers, and somebody said, hey, let's have a conference in California, and let's invite these hackers that this book talked about and get them all in the same room. Let's see, once we put all these people together, what they can come up with. That might be kind of cool. We had DEF CON. DEF CON was 1994, and it was meant to be a one-shot deal. It was supposed to be like a big farewell blowout party to say goodbye to BBSs, because BBSs started to die out in the mid-90s with the advent of the internet, right? So, Jeff said, hey, let's have a big party, say goodbye to the BBSs, and we're done, we move on. Well, now DEF CON continues and continues and continues, and it's grown into something very large and cool. So. And then we have Hackers of Planet Earth. It's a New York conference that's been around since, I want to say 95. Another conference where let's just get people in the room and talk to each other about what we're doing. What are we hacking on today? So that's changed. Now what we have is a much more direct experience, kind of, right? A lot less of the anonymous communication, a lot more face-to-face. So there's a lot of regular meetups. We have things like MilSec. We have BurbSec. These are some of the local get-togethers where people get together and they talk about things. Hey, I figured out how to do A, B, and C. Or, hey, I'm trying to figure out how to stop this person from, coming in and doing horrible things through my OWA portal. It's a way that we can bounce ideas off each other and learn from each other. There's local 2600 groups that get together. There's local DEF CON groups. There's the DC 414 group, which is phenomenal. There are, DEF CON groups pretty much all over the country, all over the world. Twitter has become a huge thing. There's a lot of noise on Twitter. There's a lot of shit posting. But there's also a lot of really good information. Looking out just in this room, I see a couple of people in this room that I follow, a couple of people that have really good info. And it's nice to be able to hop on and check a spot and see what's going on in the world. Sometimes it's bad if it's a Friday afternoon and Tavis or Orvandy posts something and you're like, oh, I'm not going home tonight. But, it's a good way for various people to be able to stay in touch. So, hackers will use Twitter. Companies will post things. Maybe a company's coming out with a new product. 0-day announcements, that Tavis seems fond of on Fridays. And so, it's a good... It's kind of a good way to kind of keep your pulse on things almost real time. And then we have conferences, right? Conferences have become kind of a big thing now. There are a lot of conferences that a lot of people go to. There's obviously CypherCon, right? There's Black Hat. There's DEF CON. DEF CON actually made it 25 years before being canceled this year. I'm not sure if anybody heard that was canceled, but there's ThoughtCon in Chicago. So there's a lot of kind of face-to-face, meet the people that you're talking to that are on the other side of the keyboard. In the old BBS days, you could talk to somebody for years and not know what they look like, not know who they were with the conferences and stuff. It kind of puts a face to the name, which is nice. ANSI art, right? Some people have to remember ANSI art. ANSI art was awesome. It was like a bulletin board for your BBS. The cooler your ANSI art, the cooler your bulletin board. Well, at least that's what people thought back then anyway. So ANSI art was a big deal. And people would get on BBSs sometimes just to grab ANSI packs and move them around and find something cool on this BBS. Oh, I want that on my BBS. I'll download it and install it. BBSs were really kind of the lifeblood in the growth of hacking. It was a way that you could get outside of your basement or your bedroom or wherever your computer was, and talk to people. You could trade wares on a BBS. You could download e-zines. There were a lot of communications that people started putting together. There was FRAC, there was CDC communications. There were several different groups that would write up these e-zines about these hacks that they were doing or these projects that they were working on. And then those would be distributed throughout the BBSs, via couriers and people, grabbing it from one, uploading it to another. BBSs really started to die around 94 when the internet took off. There's still a push. There's still some old people like me that are diehards, right? You can still download BBS software and run it on your servers. Instead of dialing in, people will telnet to it. It still has the same functionality. You can run door games and, download files and everything. The thing with BBSs is you had to bring skills to the table back in the day, right? You had to be elite, right? Otherwise, you weren't welcome. It was kind of looked at as we have this hacking group, we have our BBS set up. What can you give us? What can we take from you? What skills are you bringing to make us stronger as a hacking group? We're LOD and we have this big beef right now with MOD, and so we want better things, and they've got what do you have that you're going to contribute to us? If you had nothing to contribute, no, that was it. Forget it. Don't worry about it. Go somewhere else. Go hop on Prodigy or something. If you had skills, if you were good, you could get vouched for. And a lot of times it required somebody that was already a member to say, "Oh yeah, I know Ed, I know Sarah. They're good people. Let them in. They know what they're doing. They're really super elite hackers." And it was, in my opinion, it was kind of crappy because it kind of stagnated that talent pool. You might have somebody very intelligent that doesn't have that skill set yet that wants to learn it. They weren't able to, unless they did a lot of work on their own to try and figure it out. So part of the reason was they wanted those bragging rights that our BBS is awesome, our hacking club is awesome, but they also were very worried. There are a lot of busts that were going on for hacking and for, piracy, things like that. There were a lot of people that when they would get arrested back then, the first thing they would do is, "Hey, do you have a notepad and a piece of paper? I will give you the name of everybody on that board and all the stuff that they're doing. So a lot of people kept it a very small, close-knit community just for a safety factor, just to keep from getting arrested themselves. So now, I mean, it's really grown how we do our communications. You know, we use websites and Twitter and Tor and YouTube. You know, we have, you know, different file sharing networks that we use. And it's really kind of expanded the reach, right? So BBSs used to be mostly your local area code, right? You'd have, you know, like people will dial into this 414, but they're not going to dial into a 702 Las Vegas BBS because, well, that's long distance. That's going to rack up a huge phone bill unless you do weird trickery, which we'll get to in a bit. You know, so it was local, whereas now with the internet, it's worldwide. You know, one minute I'm talking to somebody on Twitter that's sitting 2 desks away from me that I work with, and 2 minutes later I'm talking to somebody in Turkmenistan who I've never met before, but has some good information. We're having a good conversation about stuff. So it's really kind of expanded that world to us. It's really opened things up. And you can do it from anywhere. It used to be, what are you doing tonight? I'm going to go home, boot up my computer, get on the BBS. Now I'm going to whip my phone out of my pocket and check Twitter quick. You know, it's become with smartphones, it's become much easier for us to stay in touch and to communicate with each other. Now, instead of having to be elite and having skills that you bring to the table, you need to bring that desire and that drive. And that's all that you really need for somebody to reach out and say, hey, you know, I like the fact that you want to learn. I'm more than happy to teach you. I will teach you whatever you want to know. And we see that a lot. We see a lot of security groups within companies bringing on people that maybe don't have security experience, but they want to learn about it, right? We want those people. Those people have that drive. They have that ability to learn. We can teach security. We can't teach drive, right? You know, and it's a lot easier for these people to learn stuff too. They don't have to get access to a board to get all this information. It's all out there. It's all over the internet. You know, you go out to YouTube, you watch a video, you can learn how things work. You know, you can go and, you know, buy something at DEF CON and then get on YouTube, learn all about it, and, you know, now you're able to go in and pop boxes, which good and bad depending on what side of the fence that you're on. You know, it used to be that this knowledge would die out with people, right? But now that we're able to teach the new generation and the younger people that are coming up through the ranks that maybe don't have that skill set, it keeps it alive. And that's kind of the point of this talk, is we want to keep this past and this history. We want to keep this alive and remember, you know, where we came from, because that helped us get to where we are today, and where we are today is going to determine where we're going tomorrow. And so it's very important to not only talk about the past, but to talk about what we're doing today and the future. You know, 30 years ago, we were on BBSs doing this stuff. Where are we going to be 30 years from now? Probably talking about how, I remember back when we used to use Twitter and, you know, communicated with each other. So yeah, so it's opened us up to a very nurturing type of environment, which is good. You know, the more people will learn about this, the better off we're going to be. So hacking back then was super easy in my opinion compared to now. You could do simple things. There are a lot of issues with things like file permissions, processes having way too many rights. One of my favorite things back then was you could link the password file to the dead letter file and then just send an email from nobody to nobody that contained a password file entry. In less than a minute, you've got a root account on the box, and you can pretty much do what you like on it at that point. You know, password management, people didn't really give a lot of thought about that back then. You know, in the 80s, as long as you had a password, that thing was super secure. Never mind the fact that the password is 123, you know, as long as you got a password, nobody will get into that. Security, then more so even than now, I think, was an afterthought. I mean, it's still, in some companies, kind of an afterthought. You know, oh, we rolled out this new product. Did you secure it? Well, what can we do to secure it now that it's rolled out? It was a lot more prevalent back then. And you know, as I mentioned, you know, a lot of programs that ran as root had a lot of issues. You know, you could get a program running as root and then just crash it and take over that process space. You could overwrite files. SynMail. SynMail was the bane of security people's existence for years and years and years and years. So back then, if a system had a password, it was probably super easy to guess. It was probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or it was password, or the person's birthday, or their wife's name, or their husband's name, or the dog's name. Complexity wasn't forced back then like it is now. Exploits were a lot simpler. Somebody's got bad permissions. Let's just exploit that. Bam, we're in. Or processes had way too much privilege available to them. There's no reason that a process that maybe writes a file that it needs root access to everything. Servers sat alone and in the dark. They were neglected. They were like mushrooms. If it was a night or a weekend, odds are that server is locked away and nobody's looking at it. The sysadmins went home. We didn't have things like a SOC that were watching over all these servers. They were lonesome and sad. And modems were plugged into everything. War dialing was a big thing. War dialing is where you set your modem to just dial every number in a list until it finds a carrier, and then it logs that number. Hey, I found something living here. And then you go back, you look at your list, and you call them up, and you see what lives there. A lot of servers had modems plugged in for maintenance modes. If you had like a big HP 9000, odds are there's a modem plugged in the back so that when you have problems, HP can dial in and fix it for you. Exploring humans can also dial into that and try and unfix it for you as well. We also didn't have things like bug bounty programs. So if there's an exploit, it didn't get reported right away to the company all the time, right? That exploit might live on for months or a year or years. It was the type of thing where finally a good person would see that and would notify the company, hey, there's a problem with this, or they would write their own updated drivers or updated code that fixed it. But there weren't official ways really back then to report these bugs that were found. Nowadays, the difference is being that a lot of the vulnerabilities can be very technical. Spectre and Meltdown are good recent examples of vulnerabilities that are tougher to exploit. It's not as easy as something having bad permissions or being able to overwrite a config file. You have to jump through a lot of hoops if you want to exploit Meltdown and Spectre compared to the old days. Nowadays, it really, really helps if you can program. And you don't have to be like an uber developer, but if you know some Python and know PowerShell, if you've used Metasploit a bunch and know some of the better modules, it really makes life easier from a security perspective. And sometimes now, instead of being a one-shot deal where, okay, I'm going to link this file and send an email, we're done, we're in. Now there might be several steps required. Okay, I'm going to create this config, and now I've got to link these files, and now I've got to move this file over here. A lot more of a process now to get this kind of all pushed through. Blue teams have really thrown a monkey wrench into hackers trying to get into systems. We have SOCs, we have blue teams. Blue teams are very skilled. Blue teams have all kinds of training. There's a lot of knowledge that's shared so that they're able to detect things quickly. Systems are monitored 24/7. Even if you don't have a human sitting there looking at it, we have things like Nagios and various monitoring tools that will let us know the minute something goes a little screwy with that box. And as soon as it does, somebody's getting a page, getting woken up, and they're hopping on to see what's going on. So nights and weekends are no longer the sweet spot. And we also have new technologies available to us. We have SIEMs, we have IDS, IPS. We mentioned like infrastructure and system monitoring, and they're going to tell on you. They're going to call somebody. They're going to wake somebody up in the middle of the night. That person's going to be mad about being woken up in the middle of the night, and they're going to come and look for you. Again, back in the old days, wasn't quite like that. They might find out that you were in there on Monday when they come in. So the one thing that stays the same is that humans are involved. Humans are always involved. There's always a human somewhere in the chain, right? And humans are unpredictable, unpatchable, and under deadlines. Now, you'll notice that unpatchable has an asterisk after it. And this is really small print. I apologize for that. But the disclaimer is Humans can be patched through continuous security education. Unfortunately, a lot of companies don't do this, but it's a very good point that was brought up. I believe, Jason, you had mentioned that recently, that humans are patchable. Saying a human is unpatchable is not exactly accurate. The thing that we need to do as companies is make sure that we do patch our humans, so that we continue a continuous security education kind of regimen. People are helpful. It's just in our nature. It's the golden rule: do unto others. If I need something, I want somebody to help me. Likewise, if somebody else needs something, I'm going to help them. But it's this helpfulness that can be exploited. Humans can bypass two-factor every time. So I worked for a company previously that we had our red team came in to do a pen test. They couldn't get in through the conventional means of just popping through our firewall. They called one of our users up. Hey, we need your password. User gives it out. Yeah, we're cool. We got two-factor, right? Saves everybody. They hit the two-factor. They called the user back. Hey, we tried logging in as you to fix this problem, They posed as IT. We logged in to fix this problem, but we're getting this two-factor thing. Could you do me a favor and read me the code off your phone? And they did. 5 times in one day. Yeah, it wasn't a good day for us when we had to report to the C-levels about that. The good thing is that person still works for the company. The company did not come down on that person and say, oh, you're a horrible person, you gave out your two-factor code, you're fired. The company used it as a training opportunity. They said, hey, here's an opportunity for us to provide more education to this individual. Let's explain to this person why what they did was wrong and how to not fall for this in the future, which I think really needs to be the path that's taken. So often companies are like, oh, Ed screwed up, let's can him. That's not the solution, because you're just going to get another Ed in who's going to fall for it. Improve your training posture, and that's how you fix that. Humans can forget the details of your social engineering attack. It's the old thing of be likable and forgettable. You want that person to like you, but you want them to forget about you as soon as you're out of their sight. Humans can make you appear legitimate to others. They provide that legitimacy. So if I want to get in, I want to get information off the CISO at a company, I'm not going to go straight to the CISO and try, just saying, hi, my name is Bill, and, I'm with your cloud service provider. I'm going to go to some of that CISO's underlings. I'm going to get in good with them. That might be an easier avenue. Once they are vouching for me, that gives me credibility with that CISO. And humans are everywhere. Like I said, if it's a company, there's probably a human at it somewhere in that food chain, right? Eventually you'll find that human, and you can try and exploit that. Systems rely on logic, right? Very logical, 1, 0. Humans rely on emotion. If you can play to somebody's emotions, it's done. You're in. And this has stayed the same. In the 80s, people were pretty much a guaranteed way in. In the 90s, it was that way. Now it's still that way. How do we fix it? Again, education. Let's train folks, and let's show them the right way to do things rather than scold and fire and be growly and mean. So I'm sure some of you have seen the movie Hackers. Norm was my absolute favorite. Norm was the security guard. So basically what happens is Dade calls him up, says, hey, the file I was working on is lost. My BLT drive went AWL. He looks around his room and he sees an empty food container, and he thinks, a BLT drive. Norm doesn't have the education he should as far as security stuff, so he doesn't know that this is a line of crap that he's being fed. He doesn't understand that, it's not a real thing, a BLT drive. And back then, people were not comfortable around computers. In the 80s and 90s, computers were still, in the mid-80s, not every house had a computer. I mean, computers were expensive. I had to beg my parents for years to get one, and it took my friend getting a K-Pro before I got an Osborne. I was like, People were very scared of breaking things and very scared of being in trouble. You call somebody at work, and you're like, you screwed up your computer. Yeah, this is Frank from IT, and you just broke your junk. they're going to panic, right? They're going to freak out. I'm going to get fired. It's that same fear thing. They're a little more comfortable with computers now. Everybody pretty much has a computer at home, or I should say a lot of people. They're more comfortable with doing things on it. But back then, it was real easy to have people fearful of their terminal. So you could get them to do bad things, and they wouldn't be suspicious. Yeah, hi, I'm from IT, and you did something wrong. They'll do whatever you want then at that point. I'll just fix it, make it go away. So that brings us to phreaking. So phreaking, back in the old days, back in the 80s, the phone systems used something called SS5. SS5 was like a signaling system that the phones used, and it used what was referred to as in-band signaling. So the phones had to be able to talk back to the central office and kind of say, hey, this is what's going on. This person's trying to make a phone call, and they put 2 quarters into me. Is that enough money? Well, they would do this with very faint tones that if you listen close, you could hear it. And that was in-band signaling because it was in the same band as your voice traffic, right? So you could actually record those tones, play them back to the phone, or make a device that would play those tones to the phone. And the phone would be like, oh, they just put a quarter in because I heard the sounds, even though you put nothing in it. So there are things like blue boxes, red boxes. These enabled free calls. They made it harder to trace calls. You could stack trunks across the country. Some very famous people in the computer industry financed their way through college by selling blue boxes. It kind of really took off in the late 60s, early 70s, and had a really good run through the mid 90s when they switched to a new system called SS7. With the advent of SS7, they moved to out-of-band signaling. So these codes and these tones didn't go through the phone line anyway. They went through the phone line, but not through the voice channel, so you couldn't just do craziness. Just a little bit of, trivia, if you will. There are red boxes and blue boxes in these badges. That's just one of the things you can figure out on them. Kind of neat stuff to be able to hear that. They won't work on a real phone, but kind of neat for history's sake. The phone system, it was a new frontier, right? So hackers are inquisitive, right? We want to know how things work. I'm sure a lot of us, when we were young, took stuff apart. My mom hated it. I would take things apart and never put it back together again, right? I would have crap strewn from one end of the table to the other. And my mom would be like, well, what are you doing? I'm done with it. I already took it apart. I know how it works. I'm done, bored. The phone system was like that, right? It was this new world that, what does this do? How does it work? Where does this go? And we had that inquisitive mindset that made it such a wonderful thing. Telephone companies would often leave trucks unlocked. Trucks contained service manuals. They would also throw old manuals into dumpsters. So, late at night, you're bored, you're out cruising around. Hey, there's the telco. I wonder what's in the dumpster. Oh, come a set of bell manuals. Now you know how a lot of that stuff works. So there were a lot of late night dumpster runs back in the day. So back to the boxes here. So the red boxes generated a coin tone, right? And like a quarter tone, as an example, was kind of it was like 5 high-pitched beeps. You could use them on Fortress phones or Cocots. Cocot is a customer-owned, coin-operated telephone. Basically, a person could buy a payphone, install it at their business, and then they got all the money out of it. You could play nickels, dimes, quarters. I don't know why you'd ever play a nickel or a dime unless you're just trying to make it look legitimate. We always just did quarters. And you can make it super easy. If you went to Radio Shack had a pocket dialer where you could program phone numbers in, and then you push a memory button, and it would play it back so you didn't have to be troubled with pushing the buttons on the phone. Because that was a lot of work back then, right? So if you replace the crystal inside that pocket dialer and then programmed, I think it was 5 asterisks into a memory location, that's a quarter. And so then you go and you call somebody in, Algeria, and you just start hitting the button, and it starts racking up quarters, and now you've got a free phone call. Blue boxes basically allowed you to be an operator console. You could stack trunks. You could, with the right combination of things, you could, there are ways you could become like a directory assistance operator. There are a lot of different things you could do with a blue box. Black boxes would set it so that if somebody called you, so maybe you got a BBS, right? But you're in the middle of nowhere, but you want people to call your BBS without racking up long distance charges. The black box would turn off the ringing. You could set your BBS to then pick up, but it wouldn't trip. There are two relays, one controlled ringing, one controlled billing. It shuts off the ringing relay, never trips the billing relay. So the person's never billed. The phone company and the phone system, the CO, thinks that you never picked the phone up, even though you did. So a lot of these boxes were pretty heavily used up until about the mid-90s, when, again, they rolled out SS7, took away the in-band signaling, made life a lot easier for the phone companies at that point. And they had things in place that they could detect things before SS7, but it was not as sketchy, or I'm sorry, not as reliable. It was a little more sketchy. There were times that, you crank out $3 or $4 in quarters, and all of a sudden you have an operator on the line. Sir, how many coins did you put in the phone? Yeah, 400, buy. And then you move on to the next phone before anybody in a bell truck shows up. So with phreaking, there are a lot of interesting, cool phone numbers that were out there. And these phone numbers would be traded on BBS. If somebody finds a cool number, you hop on your local phreaking BBS. Hey, I found this, feel free to use it. Or I found this. I don't know what the hell this is. Can somebody figure it out? There are loop numbers. What a loop number was, there's a high side and a low side. You could dial into one side, somebody dials into the other, and you could talk to each other. Conference bridges, that was a big thing, like the late 80s, early 90s. Everybody was dialing into conference bridges. And what that was is a business would have a conference bridge for doing conference calls. It was just a phone number you call into, and you enter a password, and now everybody can dial in, and you can all talk to each other. Well, the passwords were, 4 or 5 digits long. Doesn't take much to brute force that. So the hackers would find them. They're not being used on nights and weekends because it's owned by a business, right? That business turned off the lights in the server room, and they all went home. So the hackers would brute force these conference bridges. They'd log in, have their conversations. They'd talk about hacker stuff and phreaker stuff and just kind of hang out and do nefarious things. ANI numbers. ANI numbers were very handy. If I want to hack into my local Pizza Hut and play around with their supply ordering system, but I don't know the number, I go outside of the DMARC, the little phone box on the wall out back. I open it up. I plug in a butt set, and I call what's called ANI, automatic number identification. It's kind of what drives caller ID. And I could find out what their phone number is, read back the number I'm calling from. Now I know what the phone numbers are for this Pizza Hut on this line that I dialed out on. I'm going to go home, start calling around that area with my modem until I find a carrier. Now I know I'm into their supply system. And next week, they're getting 30,000 pounds of mozzarella, which usually leads to a sale on, like, pizzas, which is nice. And then there are interesting numbers, too. You might find a number that's really bizarre and weird. And these still exist out there. Government installations. There might be a voicemail box that's weird. There's a voicemail box for a long time that was just a duck quacking. Like, you'd call this number, and a duck would quack, and beep, and you could leave a message. Nobody really knew what it was. It was just a duck. Government installation. There are numbers that you would call, and they would rattle off weird numbers. Bravo, 6, Alpha, 9, 12. Okay, what is that? So then you'd share that number with your friends. They'd be calling. You'd all try and figure out what it was. And it was neat. It was that exploring kind of mindset. And then there were sweep tones. So sweep tones were a number that you would call, and it was just a sweeping tone. It's right all the way up, like super high pitched. Sweep tones were the thing of urban legend. They existed. It was just a test tone, a test number. The rumor was that it could detect a bug on your line. Not true. Not true. So if you think your line is tapped, don't call a sweep tone because it won't really tell you anything. So basically, in closing, there have been a lot of changes over the last 30 years. A lot of things that have advanced, but a lot of things have kind of stayed the same too, right? We all kind of started out with that inquisitive mindset. Some of us were black hats, some of us were white hats, some of us were gray hats. It all brought us here today. No matter, I'm sure we have a wide variety in the audience. everybody's experiences have kind of made the whole community what it is. So that's a good thing. Who knows what we've got for the next 30 years? It's exciting to think about with how fast things are going. It's important to remember where we came from and to pass that on to the next generation as they come up. We need to remember our history and to keep that going forward, so that we don't forget who we are.